Thank you. Thank you very much. So it's cool. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this. Um, I, yeah, I have a confession to make. I used to be a partner in a design company, and I've worked with a lot of UX designers. So I know what you guys are up to, you know. Um, um, and it's a great. I love designers in general, and UX designers in particular. Uh, my daughter is studying UX design, and it's all I hear at the dinner table. It's all the stuff she's doing. It's good. It's cool shit. Um, I thought I would start, if you don't mind. I would just start like with before we do the questions and discussions, just to get us all on the same page. I thought I would do it like a 10-minute, just this is Museum of Failure. It's a standard, boilerplate slide presentation. But I'll just do it just so you get an idea of what it is if you're not too familiar with it. Yay or nay or? Yeah, you've got your microphones off, so I'll assume that's a yay. Okay, there you go, Louis. You said yes, so you're the boss. I'll go ahead. I'm gonna share screen there. All right. So I started Museum of Failure back in 2016, 17, and I started it because there's two reasons why I started it. One was the reason I tell the media, which is not a lie, it's true, but it's that I got really fed up with all the success stories. So, and this is true, I doing my PhD in innovation and organizational psychology, focusing on innovation. I was going to all these conferences, and we had all these happy, shiny, rich entrepreneurs and people up on stage, always talking about how successful they are and how wonderful how rich they are and everything. And I just got I got sick of that bullshit, and started thinking about there's got to be more to it than all these success stories. So that was like the part of the reason. And then the main reason I started the museum is because I was fascinated with the science, the research on organizational failure and how companies fail to learn from their mistakes. They fail to learn from their failures. And so I wanted to find a way to communicate that in an interesting way. And writing a book or doing a TED Talk just wasn't going to do it. So I was really happy to get some funding from the Swedish Innovation Fund to start the Museum of Failure. Anyway, that was a long-worded introduction to the beginning there. So my background is as a clinical psychologist. I worked with patients doing depression and anxiety for 10 years before I moved on to do organizational work, doing a PhD in organizational psychology. And that's where all this stuff, all the interest in failure came from. I think this video, I don't know if you can hear this video. Can you hear it? No? The Museum of Failure is a collection of failed innovations. It's products, services, food stuff, high-tech stuff, old items, new items. They're obscure items from around the world.
It is a cool, fun exhibit. Some of these, like, what were they thinking?
You walk around in the museum, you see the big boys, Google, Apple, Microsoft, etc., etc. You see that they fail when they try something new, when they push their boundaries. And they all are at the museum to teach us that we need to accept failure, and there will be no progress without failure. That was a little sizzle reel from the last show in the United States in Minneapolis. The touring exhibit has been around the world. This is from Sweden, where we opened first. A great exhibition in Shanghai and Taiwan most recently. And if you're curious of how the museum makes any money, because exhibitions is a good way to not make money. The Museum of Failure, we offer small pop-ups, which are sort of smaller miniature museum of failure mini exhibitions for conferences and corporate events. That's basically what pays the rent for me. Like the exhibition in Calgary right now, I don't make any money off of that. But the whole point of the museum, I'll go back to that one is cool. The entire point of the museum and the aim is to, there's several aims, but the most important is to really help people understand how important failure is for any kind of progress. So it's not just tech progress, it's not design progress, it's important for anything. And if we don't accept those failures, we can't really have good stuff. We got to accept the bad things as well. In this case, it would be failure. And I'm totally convinced that the big problems that we have, that we're dealing with now, whether it be income inequality or massive environmental issues, we have to have the same approach there as we to any other progress innovation, that there's no one solution that's going to solve these huge problems, and we have to sort of be open to trying a bunch of different solutions and hoping that some of them will work. So for me, it's much more than just sort of capitalistic making money, companies designing good products and services. It goes beyond that. We have to accept failure in every aspect of innovation and progress. So yeah, for me, it's more than a collection of cool stuff. The message is important. The other message is that we have to be better learning from failures. It's not just about accepting failure. It's also saying, understanding if we're not willing to discuss failure, if we're not willing to have productive discussions about it, then we can't learn from it. And this is the problem that most companies deal with, or actually they don't deal with it. Most companies, when they fail, they fuck up, they waste a bunch of money, and then they don't really learn anything from their failures, which is a complete waste of resources. If they instead would be willing to discuss it and have some kind of productive discussion about it, they could be able to learn from it, which would benefit them greatly. But it's too uncomfortable, and most companies just avoid it altogether. And the third ambition is not really anything I designed. It was something that came afterwards, feedback from visitors. And that was that many people feel liberated when they come to the Museum of Failure, where they feel like, hey, these mega corporations with unlimited resources and competence, they still fail when they try something new. And if that's the case, then even the little guy can also fail when they experiment or explore new alternatives. So for me, that's a fun sort of third ambition of the museum that's grown organically. Yeah, that's my basic introduction. I could talk all day. I won't do it. I'll stop sharing here. No, stop share. There.
Wow, this is amazing. And well, I guess one of the first questions I have, and please, if the audience have some questions, please write them down in the chat.
Yeah, please.
I'm just going to bring them over, and you're welcome to turn on your camera, or we can read them.
Turn on your cameras. If you're not indecent, then turn on your camera.
we can edit the video out. We can put
actually, if you are indecent, please turn on your cameras. Yeah.
Fantastic. And well, let me ask you a question. How do you select the examples? I mean, we are surrounded by failure, but it has to be really
So the criteria to be in the museum is basically that we have, like right now, I think we have over 160 items, 170 perhaps. And it's growing because we get so many donations. But the criteria is quite strict. For me, it has to be an innovation. So it has to be something where it can't just be a failed product that is a manufacturing failure. So do you remember the Samsung Note, I think it was called, that caught on fire in airplanes?
Oh, right. Yeah.
It was probably about 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. That one is not in the Museum of Failure because it was not an innovation. It was just shitty manufacturing. I mean, so that did not make it into the Museum of Failure. But 2 years ago, the Samsung Fold, it was the first screen that you could, the foldable screen. That one they failed. They fucked up the launch of that one massively. And that one fits in the Museum of Failure because that was an innovation. They were trying something new. And for me, that's an important distinction. There's bad failure, which is, incompetence or sloppiness. It's failure that's predictable. That failure is always, it's always negative. But then you have the failure where you're actually pushing the boundaries, where you're pushing the envelope forward, and that's the failure that should be celebrated. So that's an important part, to have the right type of failure. I'm not really strict about it. There's some things in the museum that make no sense whatsoever, but that's it for me. And then of course it has to be a failure in some way, and then the item also has to be in some way, it has to be interesting or make sense. So there's a lot of esoteric failures in different industries that nobody can understand except people exactly in that industry, and that's difficult to have in a public museum. So as somebody's commenting in the chat, yeah, it has to be meaningful failure in some way. I try to do that. I can't keep really strict to the criteria, but that's the basic idea.
Right, and I can imagine it has to be meaningful for everybody, right? Like if your exhibition is traveling around the world.
Yeah, and also the failure. So for example, in Canada, we added, for the first exhibit there in Calgary, I added 2 more items that were specifically from Canada. There's several more innovation failures from Canada, but I couldn't get any. I couldn't get the artifacts. But and then when we were in China, in Shanghai, some of the American trademark, like the brands that are famous in the United States that nobody in China knows about, they're less relevant for the Chinese exhibit. So it does change, but by and large, as it travels the world, it's about 70–80% of the exhibition is the same as it travels the world.
That's very interesting. I can imagine that you you have a unique perspective of how an organization creates failure and how they address the good one, the bad failure. Yeah, what have you seen? Are there any patterns or anything that you can conclude?
Okay, so honestly, everybody sucks. Like, the reality is that every single company pretty much sucks at this. Even the coolest companies, like oh, we're so cool, we're designers, and we're so we're up to date, and everybody loves us. Even those companies, when it comes to sort of owning up to and learning from failure, they're just as bad as everybody else. I'm generalizing horribly now. There are exceptions to that, but by and large, that's the reality. I'm interested to hear what you guys say, if you agree with me on that, or if you disagree with me on that, because I haven't found that many exceptions to this rule. And I think it's an important reminder that this is really difficult stuff. So it is difficult. If you think about yourself just personally, owning up to your own failure as a parent, as a professional, as a partner, as a whatever, it hurts, it's uncomfortable. So it's also uncomfortable for organizations, and that's why they just don't do it. But I think there's just to be a little bit positive here, there seems to be a bit of a change happening in the past 5 years or so, where people in, like, the younger professionals in the big corporate monsters out there, they're actually, the change is coming from bottom up, like where they're saying like, hey, we need to actually increase our psychological safety within a team to make it more safe to share and to discuss failures amongst other things and be vulnerable with each other in a team. And that's changing. And it's changing very slowly, but it is going in the right direction.
That sounds like the right direction for sure. And talking about right direction, I can see quite a lot of good questions going over here in the chat. Anya, would you like to bring over some of the questions?
Yes, absolutely. I would like to ask Frank, I saw that you have a question. Would you like to present your question today?
Okay. Yeah, Anya, seems like your connection is breaking your voice, but from what I could,
You sound like somebody. What's his name? Darth Vader, or something. Yeah, exactly. Voice modulated. You sound horrible.
Yeah, it sounds all right.
Okay, so I have a question here in the chat. Do you have any theories on each of the failures and why they failed? That's an excellent question, and I get asked that quite often by corporate interests. Like, what's the, like, is there a way to avoid failure when it comes to innovation? And the answer to that is no, because there's so many different ways new products and services can fail. It's not just marketing or design or the launch or if there's a need, a customer need. There's so many more reasons a product or service can fail. So but there are some themes at the museum, and I'm not saying these are super strong, but they do exist. So I'm not saying these are the definitive themes, but one of those things that I think is interesting is when a product is overhyped. So there's a lot of products at the museum, older ones, newer ones, where when a product or service has been overhyped, and that's easy to do today, all you need is a few videos to go viral. It's not easy, it's easier today. And if customer expectations are too high, then, and the product doesn't deliver, which, I mean, if it's overhyped, it's impossible to deliver, then the crash is so hard, and very seldom do companies actually recover from that. So there's examples. There's an old example of that would be from 1958, Ford Edsel. It was Ford's biggest innovation sort of initiative ever, called the most expensive automotive failure ever. It was named after Henry Ford's son, Edsel Ford, and they did all kinds of innovative things with the design, with the technology, and with the marketing of the car. And one of the things they did was the front. If you're on, go ahead and Google Ford Edsel and do Google image Ford Edsel. Ford Edsel on Google Images, front grille, I guess you could do. There you go. There's the Wikipedia. And check it out if it's got the photo on there. Okay, yeah, look on the Wikipedia link here in the chat. And you have that aquamarine colored Edsel there. So it looks, I think it looks really cool. We have a real Ford Edsel at the Calgary exhibition outside of it's super cool. And this one was overhyped. Like Ford, they had a like a evening entertainment show on TV prime time with Frank Sinatra and all the big stars, where it was called the Edsel Show, and they like Edsel, the Ford Edsel, and they hyped it up like crazy with the celebrities. And they had advertisements on television with like the silhouettes. You couldn't tell what it was, but it was the silhouettes of the Edsel saying, coming soon, like get excited. And then, yeah, the interior is super advanced. There's if you look at the middle of the steering wheel, that's the transmission. You would push park, drive, neutral, inside. It was like crazy advanced. That was just one of the things. And they were so confident that this would be successful that they forced the Ford dealerships to pre-order massive amounts of Ford Edzos because they knew it would be a total success. And then what they fucked up on was that it was too complex. There was too many options available, so people didn't actually know whether the Ford Edzo was an expensive premium car or whether it was a cheap, affordable car, or where it was on the spectrum. That was when it was confusing. There was too many options. And I mean, if you've heard anything about the Ford Edzo, yeah, I also love the way it looks. I think it looks great. But if you look at the grille, it's vertical. So most cars have a horizontal grille on the front. And you have to think that this is 1958 in the United States. So people thought that the Ford Edzo was indecent because it looks like female genitalia.
Okay.
So you're like thinking like, really? So is that a reason to fail the car? That was part of the reason why, like, hey, this is all cool, but it looks, it doesn't look proper for a Christian family in America, 1958. That was not the only reason it failed, but that was one of the reasons. And it's kind of like, you think about, okay, had they not overhyped it, it probably would have been perfectly acceptable and good, a successful car. But they were so confident, so they pushed it so far. And then we have modern day examples of overhype where, some computer games. No, it's evading me right now. No Man's Sky was one that was recent, like 4 years ago. And then there was one recently called Cyberpunk 77, I think it was. Also super hyped up, and then when people see it, it's like, oh, really? This is what it is. And then because of a product being overhyped, the judgment and the criticism is so strong that you can't really recover from that. So that's one theme for sure. Yeah, Fire Festival for sure. We actually have the Fire Festival in the museum. We have a styrofoam box with a piece of wonder, like nasty white bread and processed cheese on it, and a piece of wilted lettuce on it, like in a box. And this is the luxury $2,000 lunch that you would get at the Fire Festival. But these are examples. So that's one theme. Another theme of failure would be how so there's an idea that the eccentric innovator, the owner of a company, Elon Musk, I'm thinking about you asshole. We look up to this myth of the crazy eccentric innovator, right, and successful business person. And if you look at the museum's collection, there's quite a few failures that are there because of the eccentric innovator company owner that just doesn't listen to anybody. And it's kind of interesting because we're often taught like, oh, the mavericks of the world, they push through, they don't listen to anybody, they have their conviction and they just go forward and they're successful. That's bullshit. Like, there's a lot of failures in the museum that exist for that very reason, that the company owners or leaders don't listen to the engineers, the designers, customers, etc. So those are two examples of themes at the museum, why things fail. Bad design, I'm not going to humor you guys, but bad design is definitely a huge factor as well. Like, if you can't use the damn thing, it's worthless.
Well, that makes us busier, but also puts more responsibility on us.
Yeah, shape up.
Yep. Anya, do you want to have a second try with your microphone? Or let's see how that sounds.
Okay.
Yeah, Anya,
please
we're
let me
gonna
know.
put your computer into the museum affair, like I suggested.
Telus Wi-Fi into Museum of
That's why
Failure.
fine.
Do I sound like Lord Vader?
No,
Or
now
is
you
it
sound great. Now you sound great.
Yeah, you can-
amazing? Okay, maybe we should not put Telus Wi-Fi in there. I'm
Anyway.
sorry because my internet broke for a little bit. So did we do the like any of the questions or? Uh,
you can bring over somebody that wants to share a question with us.
okay.
Your question, if they don't mind.
I think Patrick was the first one to ask a question. Patrick, would you like to share your question with us?
Sure. I guess I just want to be a little meta here. It's like as the museum was developing, like were there any failures that you learned about the exhibit and that you had to change, or like do you feature yourself in the Museum of Failure at some point?
Okay, you got meta really quickly there. So okay, so when I open, I'm a psychologist, I'm a researcher. I know nothing about museums. I have no experience. I had no experience. So when I opened Museum of Failure, I didn't have the faintest clue as to what I was doing, which you know, unsurprisingly led to a series of expensive and difficult failures along the line. You know, the first exhibit in Sweden, I spent all the money I got from the innovation fund went to overpriced display sort of solutions, like super fancy, awesome, specially designed and custom created displays, sort of cases or podiums for the museum. I spent all the money on that, so I didn't have any money for anything else, which almost killed the museum before it even got started. I fucked up on the licensing. I didn't know anything about how to do like what do you, if you have a super successful in the media, at least as far as media coverage exhibition, I didn't know anything about the business model of how does all this work. So you know, I signed contracts for licensing that I should never have done. Big failure. The biggest failure for me was that my ex-business partner sued me. A designer sued me, claiming that the Museum of Failure was his idea. And that cost me so much money in legal fees that I had to go into personal bankruptcy in Sweden because of that, which was absolutely, you know, sucked. That was an extremely powerful sort of learning message for me to get my shit together as far as my financial strategy and sort of business model. So all these things, obviously, they would, I mean, they're all failures and small. My funny failure for the Museum of Failure was the one that I say if I get asked on media, hey, do you have any of your own failures? One that's easy to explain is when I first got the idea to Museum of Failure, I registered the domain museumoffailure.com because I'm smart. But when I got the invoice, it said, congratulations to museumoffailure.com. So, you know, I'm the only museum curator that cannot spell the word museum. So I own the misspelled museumoffailure.com as well. And all those things, I mean, to answer your question, those are some examples, but to answer your question, my biggest take-home message of after like eating, breathing, swimming, living failure for 6 years is I'm not afraid of it. I'm not afraid of failure. Honestly, I'm not reckless in any way. I still don't want to lose money or prestige or anything else, but I'm not, I can see how failure affects other people. And honestly, both people, employers, the world is very forgiving if you fuck up, but you have to own up to it. You know, you have to be sincere and vulnerable in your fuck ups and failures. And if you're doing it for the right reasons, if you're pushing your boundaries, if you're learning something new and you're testing something and you fail, it's almost endearing, it's positive, and not always, but for the most part. And even in the corporate world, if you're on the, if you're in a innovation, sort of high-paced innovation type environment, then you're allowed to fail, and we should be less afraid of it. That's my most sort of important realization from working with this, that we overestimate how horrible the consequences of failure are.
Thank you. That was extremely inspirational, and I guess it's worth not to be scared of failure, but like be meaningful in the mistakes we make, as you said. The next question that we have here is from Greg. Greg, would you like to introduce your question to Samuel?
Well, I think he might have answered it in that long
Too long.
diatribe just before the previous question. So I think he might have looked at the comments. Is that correct, Samuel?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I said, do you have any theories on each of the failures and why they failed? And then you went into the theme. So
Yeah.
I think I've been answered already.
Yes, I have nothing more to say on that.
Thank God.
Okay, we got it though. The next question was from, I'm sorry if I spell it wrongly, Celia Nichols. Would you like to introduce your question to Samuel?
Sure, yeah. I was just wondering if any of the failures in the museum, if you zoom out a little bit, are actually steps on a path to like a greater success later on.
Yeah. So one thing about failure that's quite interesting is, it depends on where you put the dot in the timeline, like, and how you analyze it. So something that's a failure immediately after launch, a product, for example, it can be a failure, a commercial failure right away. But then years later, it becomes a massive success. So it's kind of difficult. Like, where are we going to put the deadline or the point, and say from this point on or from this point backwards we're going to analyze it and deem something to be a failure. So some examples of that. I mean, one of my favorite examples is the Roland 303. It's a synthesizer from the Japanese manufacturer Roland, and they launched it in, I think it was the early 90s or late 80s, I can't remember. And they it was supposed to be a synthesizer to substitute a bass guitar, but the thing didn't sound anything like a bass guitar, and the manual was huge, and it was just complicated to use, and it was an immediate commercial failure. But then a few years later, some musicians in in Chicago, they picked up these synthesizers in like secondhand stores, and they didn't have the manual, so they started playing around with it themselves, and it led to the development of the genre of acid house. And I love Daft Punk, and every single one of their tracks has the 303 in it. And that iconic sound, you can't hear any modern music, at least electronic music, without the 303 synth sound in it. The 303 was a failure for Roland initially, and they wrote off millions of dollars and loss because of it. But it didn't take long before they also sort of redeemed themselves, and right now they're selling, the ones in the museum are retro design, brand new retro 303s, and they're, it hasn't hurt the company at all. If nothing, it's made them more successful, and it's led to development within music. So that's one example of like something that was a complete failure immediately or a year or two after launch, but then turned out to be quite successful. And then there's other ones as well. But my problem with those stories of like failure leads to success is that then you were framing failure within the narrative of success. And I refuse to do that. I think failure has its own merit. even if it doesn't lead to success in any way. I mean, the other examples are the Post-it note and Viagra, and the heart medicine that the male patients didn't want to stop taking. Those are the classic examples of sort of failures that led to success further down. But those are not in the museum.
Those are great though. You can like see that there's different ways that products end up going, I guess. Okay, there's another question for you from me. When would you like to read your question, please?
Hi. So we went to your exhibit on the weekend.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed it. And I find some of the writing is hilarious. Did you write all the description?
All
Like, for
right.
example, the one that stood out was the telecom minitel. I'm like, are you?
Oh, are you
was like
French?
about the French?
Are
No,
you
I'm not
French? Okay, good.
No.
I
I'm
wrote that
friends
to
who are
piss off
French.
French people.
Oh boy, I have to show it to my friends who are French.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
So the text, I wrote most of the text myself. In the European part and the Asian, I have 3 units, so there's 3 copies of the Museum of Failure. One in the United States, one in Europe, and one in Asia, in China right now. So for the European and the Asian, I've written all the text myself. For the American exhibition, which is now in Calgary, the American agent said, your texts are too nerdy and they're too technical and they're too boring. You have to make them a little bit more funny. So they've added some dad jokes and some puns and stuff there to make text a little bit more interesting to read. And then sometimes they get a bit carried away with that. But 80% of the text that you read there in Calgary is I've written those texts. And about the the Minitel from France, that one is specifically directed to French people because I like to piss off French people.
Well done.
I love it. I am so excited to read them on Wednesday.
If you have any French friends, you have to take a photo of the Minitel and the sign and say, what? I didn't know this, and then have them explain themselves. I can't wait till the Museum of Failure opens in Montreal. They're gonna kill me.
Gonna be great. The next question is from Uriel. Would you like to read your question to Samuel?
Yeah, sure. I think Samuel's already answered the question. I think Patrick asked a similar one, and you talked about your kind of personal experience with failure while creating the museum and putting it together. Museum, how do you call it?
It's actually a touring exhibition if you want to be strict about it, but Museum of Failure sounds much better.
Okay, especially when it's spelled wrong. That's
no. I ended up buying, there was some artist in the United States that owned the correct spelling. So I actually had to buy it. It's the only time I've ever bought a domain. So I bought the domain from them.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I love it. I love the whole story. It's quite extravagant and it fits well with the theme here. But
with the theme. now
that we've heard your kind of personal journey, I guess how I came across the museum was through the CBC Ideas podcast.
Yeah.
Back in 2021. Yeah, you were on there talking about failure. The theme of the podcast episode was an ode to failure and how important it is for innovation. But there's always that, that framing of like failure is important to succeed, right? So we're going to remove the success part of it. So my question to you is, since we have this convoluted and complicated, societal relationship with failure, would you, have you ever thought of coming up with another term for failure that takes all the shittiness out of it and just leaves the fun in there?
Yeah, that's great question. So I did a a keynote and some discussion afterwards at a big pharmaceutical company like 2 months ago. And it was like this massive company with all the money in the world and all the hotshot leadership people there. And the person, the person that volunteered to be on stage with me, I asked her the question. She's like the vice president of the company. And have you ever failed? And she like, we'd already prepared, all this was semi-scripted. We'd already talked about it before we went up on stage. And then on stage in front of the, all the employees, and she could not say the word failure. She talked about her fuck up in detail, and she talked about, what it was and how much it cost and this, but she never said the word failure. And then we discussed that afterwards, like, why didn't you say failure? It's obviously a failure. And then she's like, she's in corporate, she's very successful in the corporate environment, and she does not say the word failure. It's been erased from her vocabulary. And I thought that was interesting, how a word can be so powerful, which makes me even more committed to actually keeping the word failure, because I think if by sort of using corporate bullshit or any other ways to sort of minimize the power of that word or decrease the power, we're doing it a disservice. I think we have to celebrate failure, and it hurts, it's uncomfortable, it's expensive, it's embarrassing, and it's a reality. And rather than sort of framing it as something nice, which is quite easy to do, challenges, blah, 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 blah. I think we do it a disservice. And I'm happy to continue using failure. There's a great book, there's somebody in the chat, there's The F Word. There's a great book called The Other F Word. It's about failure in entrepreneurship. And it is an F word. You don't use it in corporate speak. And definitely not about yourself or your team. And I hope that the sort of the current changes, slow changes in corporate culture will change that, but it's not happening tomorrow.
Okay, that's
yeah.
Unrelenting. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I will never
embrace failure.
Yeah, I will never. I will always call it failure. And I get asked when I do keynotes. I get asked, could you do a talk called "Succeeding in the Face of Challenge"? I'm like, no. I won't do. It depends how much they pay. I'll do anything for money, but yeah. No, failure is where it is.
Yeah. Thanks for answering the question.
Yeah, that's really good. We're not talking about success, just the F word. So far that's it in the chat, but I would like to ask the audience if anyone else has questions and wants to ask Samuel about it.
Well, I have one question, and this is more on the, well, we know that some environments or some companies or some people do not like to hear about failure, right? But you're putting it to display, you're talking about that, you're showing some specific examples, and I was wondering if some of the teams or the companies or a specific inventor or creator reach out to you and said, you know what, just shut it down, just keep it quiet.
Stop it.
Stop it.
Yeah, I mean, I had two stories there. I'll try to keep it short. The first year, the first summer we opened in Sweden, that's when we got all the global press, and we had people from all over the world that came to the exhibit. I was there. It was like a slow day and whatever. I was there, and this couple, this older couple, American couple in Sweden. They're there for a long time, and I was like, okay, but they read English, so it's not because they don't understand English, so that can't be the reason. And they're there and they take notes and everything. And then afterwards, the man, he introduced that he wanted to speak to the manager, and I happened to be there. I'm like, yeah, I own it. Shit, I'm in trouble now. And he says, he hands me his business card. And he says, I'm a VP of innovation at Microsoft. And I was like, shit, because we have like 2 or 3 Microsoft products in the museum. And then I was like, okay, I get all sweaty and everything. And then he says, I love your museum. Please contact me because we have many more fuck ups that you don't have in your museum. So that was a positive sort of response on that. And that's like 90% of the companies that are at the museum. They won't officially go out and say they love being in the museum, but they have no problem buying conference packages or pop-up museums from me, and fully embracing sort of the idea of the museum. But one company that's threatened to sue me, there's only one of the companies in the museum, is Colgate. We have a Colgate frozen dinner at the museum from 1960s. And I did a lot of research on it, and after I did it, there's some investigative journalists that have done more research on it. And this is real. In the 60s, they did launch a frozen dinner line. But in the museum, my intern, she's like an amateur designer. She made a replica of a frozen lasagna to represent the frozen dinners from Colgate. Anyway, when the museum got global attention, Colgate's lawyers contacted me and threatened to sue me for having the Colgate in the museum. And I was like, either you give me an official statement that says this is bullshit, this never happened, and I'll take it out of the museum, or send me the original packaging and we can have it in the museum and have some fun with it. And they never contacted me again. They're the only ones that have been negative.
Wow. That's actually in many ways put us a challenge, right? I really want to fail big enough to make
yeah. I mean, some companies actually contact and donate their own items and say we want to be seen as a cool, innovative, open company. So we want to be in the Museum of Failure. So a considerable part of the items in the museum is donated by the companies themselves.
Oh, can you imagine I imagine the rejection letter. Sorry.
Yeah.
We have a lot of examples. Excellent. Do we have more questions? Anyone wants to jump in and share some?
I do have a question.
The moderator bonus.
A lot of that. So I was thinking about like the sunk cost fallacy a little bit. So it's like when you put so much resources into something, when do you give up? Like, do you have any thoughts on that? By like,
okay, I can't hear what you said, but you said something about when you put resources into an initiative, when is it time to give up?
yeah, like the sunk cost fallacy.
Yeah.
Like,
So there's some interesting research on that, on when companies should kill innovation projects, and the answer is quite quickly. And there's a very different culture amongst companies in the United States, especially obviously in the Silicon Valley, Northern Californian area, versus the rest of the world. But I worked with a German professor who says like one of the reasons that German companies are failing to innovate on the scale that they need to remain competitive. There's nothing wrong with German quality. German innovation is not where it should be. And he's like, the reason they don't do it is because they refuse to kill projects. They, instead of killing a project, they'll just add more money to it and hope that it sort of repairs itself. And this is a dysfunctional strategy. So I think Google Ventures probably has the coolest, the most straightforward strategy where they're like, if you have a good idea, we'll give you money. Here's money to your team. You get a month to do something with it. And then after a month, we're going to kill your project. And then if your project gets killed, that's fine. No, it's fine. It's good. If you don't get killed, then you get more money. And then at the next meeting, try to kill it again. And just basically always trying to kill the project. And when it doesn't, if it survives, it gets to flourish. There's something sort of innately beautiful about that evolutionary approach to innovation. Not all companies can afford that kind of strategy, but it's kind of, for me, it kind of proves the point that just kill it early. If it's bad, just kill it. Like Don't prolong the suffering, and start new ones.
Yeah, it sounds like a great idea. For sure. So, does anyone else have any more questions?
Tell them to stop talking.
From James. Yeah.
Hi,
James?
Sam. Sorry, I just had to
Hi.
take some time to unmute. I don't really have a question. I just want to say thank you so much for doing this. You come through with such authenticity. Actually, a question comes to mind. Was there a catalyst that sparked you on the road of entrepreneurship? Or was it just kind of a project that fell in your lap as you encountered failures in your day-to-day life?
I've always, I did a even if I'm a psychologist, I did a psychological test. A friend of mine is a headhunter for the top sort of management in Scandinavian companies and organizations. And so he did a test on me maybe about 10 years ago. And then after I did this sort of very intensive, very high quality sort of profile testing for his headhunting sort of business, he told me that he would never hire me, and he would never recommend me as an employee for anybody in any situation anywhere. He's a friend of mine. And it kind of like, I realized that okay, yeah, I have a hard time. I don't like to have a boss. I can't. That's my answer. That's why I've always had my own businesses when I can. I have not always had, obviously I've had my jobs in between, but I've always seen them sort of as temporary sort of stations in between my own stupid business ventures. So I haven't been very successful at them, but I've had fun. So
I think that's worth its weight in gold, though.
so do I. I'm like, there's plenty of boring jobs out there. I don't want to have those. So I'd rather have fun and, drive
And the
a shitty
stories,
car.
yeah, like all the experiences, just as you kind of come up with them anecdotally. It's amazing to see, and you come through with just such authenticity. I love what you're doing. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hi, I have a question for you. When you got started, you said you had actually people believing in you because that's how they invested in you. How did you start that process? I mean, just the initial stages and up to now. Can you kind of give us a time?
So I'm lazy. I don't really like to work that much. So I had found, before I started Museum of Failure, for after I did my PhD, and just because I was tired of consulting and working clinically. And then after that, I found I became quite good at writing project sort of applications for funding for small projects. And I helped other people sort of get funding for their projects, and I did some innovation projects on my own. So it was because of that I was able to write the sort of fund, what do you call it? What do you call those in English? I don't know.
Is it a grant?
A grant, yeah, like an innovation grant. So doing that sort of writing the sort of project description and budget and all that stuff, I could do that myself. I didn't need help with that. It's because of those 2-3 years of working on smaller projects that allowed me to apply for this bigger project for Museum of Failure. And also in those years doing the PhD within sort of innovation, creativity, that environment was very stimulating. It was all these people, designers, part of them, people with grand, crazy ideas, and being part of that environment is very stimulating, which made me think like, hey, even if I have no idea I have no experience of running a museum or even designing one, I felt confident that I could do it because of that sort of stimulus from that group. So for me, I mean, I already had a career as a clinical psychologist. I wasn't 25 years old trying to find my way. I already had my kids, my house, my car, and career. So I didn't need all that. But I still chose to be part of that environment because it was so stimulating, and I attribute that to even, you know, having an idea and then believing in it and then putting some effort into getting funding for it. I was lucky I got funding right away for the project, and that saved it. But I think I would have done, in retrospect, I would have opened Museum of Failure anyway, even if I wouldn't have gotten the funding. It just would have taken an additional year to do it. I don't know if I answered your question, but for me, the environment is super important. And right now, the past, you know, with the COVID, staying at home, it's all good and everything, but I don't have that same stimulation now as I did, you know, before COVID, or even before I started the museum. And I miss that. I like having lunch with a crazy person who has nothing in common with me, and has completely different ideas of what's important to them. And just, I don't know, for me, that was the most important thing before Museum of Failure, and it still is.
That's great. So do you still do psychology consult in addition to this, or you're just full time?
Yeah, I stopped because it was so intensive there, 2017, 18, 19, there, right up until COVID. It was it was insane amounts of travel I was doing and talks and everything. And then everything died during COVID. And I started thinking, you know, what do I want to do in the future, and all those questions. But I started a small sort of a consultation with creative people. So I started with a talent agency in Spain where I live, and it turned out really good to take the psychological toolbox of therapy, of modern therapy, and apply those specifically to people in creative industries and people that are either creative in, you know, professionally creative, or artists, where they have to actually, their creativity is their source of income. It's a completely different thing from being creative on the weekend. And yeah, I put together, I was just experimenting with my friend, and it turned out so successful. So I've decided to keep doing. It's not a lot. I'm not doing it primarily for the money, but it's a fun, and for me, interesting way to keep my sort of clinical expertise, sort of muscles still up to date. And it's fun working with creative people and the specific questions and issues that they deal with, that I'm not being mean here, but there's a difference between creative people and non-creative people, even psychologically, and how they deal with the world and the problems they have versus that they don't have, which I think is it's new to me, and it's super exciting to be working with that. So yeah, I do that, but it's not, I don't have a website, and I haven't commercialized it at all, but I think it's super interesting. I want to continue doing that.
That is really, really cool. I'm glad you got the founding, because what you're doing is absolutely awesome.
Yeah.
So thank you
the
to
design
whoever
took
was
all the money,
part
though.
of this decision. Actually, I had another question. Do you have a product in your museum that you wish actually succeeded? Something that was a
that's a
failure?
good question. Yeah. Oh, I love that. If you just do yourself a favor, and it's called the Sinclair C5. I'll write it in this chat.
Yes, please.
It's either C5 or -5. I can't ever remember what it is. It was an early electric vehicle in the United Kingdom that was way ahead of its time. It was badly designed at the time, safety wise and every other way. But I have that in the museum, and it's cool. It was just, 30, 40 years ahead of its time. And I wish that would have become, thanks there for the Wikipedia link there, but I wish that thing would have been a success. I think it's sad that it's not a success.
The little car looks so fun.
It does. And check out the YouTube videos. Just check out Sinclair C5 YouTube, and it's you know, it looks like I have one, and it's really cool, and it's well designed from an ergonomic perspective. You sit you sit with a straight back and everything, but from a safety perspective, it's absolutely miserable. But take a look at it. It's interesting, and there's a lot written about it. It's one of the United Kingdom's biggest sort of, or most infamous innovation failures historically, at least.
We should take what's good and make it safer and better and use it.
Definitely. Can I ask something of you guys? If you have, because the Museum is going to continue a tour in Canada, if you have any suggestions of Canadian innovation failures, please send me an email. It can be small or large or historical or current, dumb or silly or anything. Any ideas that you have, just send me an email, because we need to expand and have a few more Canadian artifacts of failed Canadian innovation. So anything like that, please send it to me. I would appreciate it.
Absolutely. And if you cannot find one, try to make one.
Yeah. If you can't suggest a fuck up, send your own fuck ups.
Well, we have maybe last question from Miguel. So, please, Miguel, would you like to bring it?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for your generosity and your time. I will make this last question pretty brief. I think it's a nice wrap up. Like, future direction, you know, can you give us a sneak peek into the future of the Museum of Failure, or any subsidiary things that will come of it? I can see like a, you know, failure advocacy campaign. Samuel West, the president of failure. But what can we look forward to? Yeah.
So I wish I could say this is exactly what's happening, but I've got too many things going on. So I have to prioritize. But one thing I think is, and this is totally nerdy, but in one of the biggest problems in science is the positive publishing bias. So the studies that get published in the scientific journals are studies that show that show an effect, that, hey, we did an experiment, it turned out just as we planned. Which means that, you know, the majority of science is done, or research that's done today is never published, because most of it is a failure. And that's such a shame, because some of the best you know, scientific studies are done that show that things don't work out. And that's a big problem in not just in psychology or economics or social sciences, but even in biology and physics. So I really want to start, I'm working on now starting like the Journal of Failure, or the academic, whatever, the Journal of failed scientific experiments. And the idea there is to publish studies, quality studies that have zero significant results. So, and that's the big problem. And that's a dream I have, because I think that would sort of open up the discussion in the scientific community to say, if anybody knows this to be true, it's them, but still the change isn't happening. That's one thing. And then I also want to expand the Museum of Failure to include more, and this is really tricky stuff, but I want to have it to include more sort of abstract things like ideological failure, things like that, and even like maybe go into political stuff without, you know, not too political, but to go where like there are things that happened ideologically where people believe something was absolutely wrong that we can laugh at today. And I believe that a lot of things that's going on in today's society in 10 years will say, why didn't people take climate change seriously? You know, what were we thinking back then? Because we were fucking stupid. That's what. And I think we need a reminder that our thoughts, even our concepts that we take for granted, are not always true. They change with time. So I'd like to have some of that. So I haven't gotten that far with that. it'll come.
Thank you so much, Samuel. This is very exciting. And I guess the last question is really where we can keep track of what they're doing, where the Museum of Failure is going.
Yeah, I'm really bad at social media, but the website museumoffailure.com, if there's any exhibitions opening relatively soon, it's up there immediately. And then it's probably on Instagram and Facebook. Anytime there's it's like dead in between shows, and then when there's a show, whoever organizes the show puts up some advertisements there. So keep track of it on that, definitely.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot. And in case you didn't know, we have a visit next Wednesday.
Cool. Yeah.
It's much more fun to do it together. If you can, it's okay. You can come anytime. It's a temporary exhibition, just so you know. So make your plans. It's not going to be here forever, you know. So take some good time to visit, to learn, to meditate on failure. And if you have the opportunity, please send a thank you note to Samuel for this amazing time with us, for putting all of this together, for putting his soul and money and effort on building this.
Yeah, way too much money. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I hope all of that comes back and multiply by 10,000 in anytime soon. Yes, okay, I can imagine the raining money going over there. But thanks a lot, Samuel. And yeah, please, everybody, if you have an opportunity, send him a message, you know, on LinkedIn or anywhere else, and just say thank you. It's been an amazing life.
Thank you, guys. It's great questions. Thank you. This is refreshing. I usually do just pure talks and something with a little bit of Q&A. This was refreshing. So thank you for the questions.